June 4th, 1998 was one of the happiest days of my life. It was the day I welcomed my firstborn into the world. I named her Khaili Elizabeth, but we just called her Khaili for short. We counted her fingers and toes and eagerly awaited the results of her first checkup, which were great. She was perfect in every way. She took her first steps at 7 months old, which is extremely young, and began to talk early too. She was a normal, happy, mischievous toddler who kept us on our toes. She loved Dora the Explorer and sang the theme song everywhere we went. But everything changed on May 2nd, 2001. Khaili hadn't been feeling well and had noticeably larger, swollen glands in her neck, under her jaw. The doctor wasn't very concerned at first, explaining that many different minor ailments could cause swollen lymph nodes. He ran a battery of tests and prescribed her an antibiotic. But 2 weeks later, she still hadn't improved, and her lymph nodes were now the size of golf balls. We went back to the doctor, who, at this point, was a little more concerned, and ran even more tests. A couple of days later, he called and asked me if I could come in for her results. I worked in a doctor's office, and I knew what that meant. Good news is given over the phone, but bad news requires you to come in. I was right. He wanted me to know that Khaili had tested negative for mono, the Rockamelia virus, catch-scratch fever, and a number of other things, but her white blood count was off the charts, and her SED rate was still very high. A number of other tests also came back indicating that she was suffering from lymphoma, a blood cancer, and that she had an appointment at Albany Med's Pediatric Hematology Oncology Unit for that same afternoon. I was in shock and had a hard time believing this sweet little angel who had just spent the morning singing and counting to 10 could possibly be suffering from cancer. I remember leaving the office and strapping her into her car seat. I began to drive when it finally hit me, and I had to pull over because my tears were so thick that I could no longer see the road well enough to drive. I didn't have a cell phone back then, so when I calmed myself down finally, I drove to a cousin's house who lived nearby. She agreed to drive us to the hospital. Word traveled fast, and family and friends began arriving in the waiting room. They all hugged me and told me it was going to be okay. And little Khaili, oblivious to what was going on, played with toys in the waiting area, a beaming smile on her face every time a new friend or family member showed up. To her, this was one big party. We finally had the consultation, and the doctor explained what would be next. A biopsy of the lymph nodes, and a bone marrow study. They would like to do these things right away. Would tomorrow be okay? I remember her grabbing me firmly by the shoulders and telling me that she would do everything she could for my daughter, and rattling off statistics that she thought would be comforting. That girls with lymphoma do much better than boys, and how there was an 85% survival rate. 85%. All I thought about was yesterday my daughter had a 100% survival rate, and now there was a 15% chance that she would die. I didn't sleep that week, or eat. I was a walking zombie, my head full of unanswered questions. I needed a plan. I sat on the internet for hours looking for resources that could help. That only made things worse. I read that most kids who pass away aren't actually victims of the cancer itself, but of secondary infections they pick up while their little immune systems are weakened during chemotherapy. So naturally, I bleached every surface in my house and told my family to stay away if they might be sick. I even made an appointment for her at St. Jude's, worried that Albany Med was not advanced enough, believed that I would regret not seeking the very best care for her. Luckily, my aunt showed me that I was overreacting. We threw her the biggest birthday party you can imagine. There were cake and cupcakes. All of the neighborhood friends and family members came. It was a wonderful day. And afterwards, we cut her hair, which was all the way down to the middle of her back, into a short bob, in preparation for the chemotherapy. After the first week, it was my father who finally pulled me out of the dark cloud that I had sought shelter under. He reminded me that God was all I really needed, and that I just needed to pray and believe, and that everything was going to be okay. He was right, it helped. The other thing that helped were the other moms in the waiting room at the They helped them with their homework while they waited to be seen. Talked about normal things like dinner and family get-togethers. Their lives seemed normal, and that meant that mine could be too, if I let it. Khaili's bone marrow study showed atypical cells, which were indicative of lymphoma. So the next step was to schedule an appointment to insert her chemotherapy port. The pediatric surgeon was going to do the biopsy at the same time, so she would only have to undergo anesthesia once. It was supposed to take over an hour, so we were quite surprised when he came out after only 45 minutes and said that he had to cut it short. He said that the biopsy had surprised him. He had done many biopsies, and the tissue did not look malignant to him. He was so confident that it wasn't cancer that he refused to put the port in and wanted more testing done before he would feel comfortable doing it again. Her oncologist called us in the same day for more blood work, and it would take 2 days to get the results. Those were the longest 2 days of my life. When we finally went in to meet her again, she said that she had excellent news. The cancer had vanished. Her test results were normal. You'd think that I would be happy, but instead I was skeptical. How does cancer vanish? She said she had no explanation, that it was a true medical miracle. When we met with her again a week later, things were still normal. She said after reviewing all of her records, she thought that it must have been a rare virus that mimicked malignancy. I still felt uneasy. I was finally feeling better emotionally, and I couldn't take another letdown. I was afraid that they would tell me, "Sorry, we made another mistake. She does have cancer." She assured me that our journey wasn't over, and that wasn't going to happen. She said that Khaili would be tested every month, and then every 3, and finally just once a year, until they were sure that it wasn't going to come back. I'm happy to say that today Khaili is 18 and as healthy as can be. She has had 2 similar occurrences since, and we have learned that her body reacts to sickness differently than others. Severely swollen lymph nodes are perfectly normal for her. Life is good for us, but we haven't forgotten the moms we left behind in the waiting rooms at Albany Med, the ones who didn't get our miracle, the ones who worked appointments for chemotherapy, radiology, and consults in between soccer games and PTA meetings. We haven't forgotten the amazing staff at Albany Med who went above and beyond to see Khaili smile again after getting her blood drawn or having a difficult procedure. And we certainly haven't forgotten the doctors who worked long, stressful shifts and never stopped looking for a cure. We remember them in our prayers and honor them by raising money for the Light the Night Walk each year, because we know that someday, through research and dedication, every child affected by lymphoma will get their miracle.
Creatures of my dreams raise